Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, before I proceed to my statement, I would like to make also 3 remarks with regard to the statement of the Russian delegate. First, Mr. Betsa, you're not Ukrainian and don't pretend to be. Second, whenever one nation with Russia, it will never be one nation with Russia. Ukraine is a democratic, free European country, while Russia is an aggressive state which wages aggression, terrorism, war crimes and crimes against humanity, and also genocide. And third, entire statement by Mr. Betsa is a vivid example of manipulation, disinformation, and Russian propaganda. And I'll continue with my statement. I wish to thank the UK Presidency for convening today's meeting. I'm also grateful to the Undersecretary Di Carlo for her briefing. At the outset, I would like to express my profound gratitude to all UN member states that had voted today in the morning for the UN General Assembly resolution support for lasting peace in Ukraine just a few hours ago, on this very grim anniversary, 4 years of Russia's full-scale invasion against my country and 12 years of Russia's aggression against my country. The international community has sent a clear signal for an immediate ceasefire as a prerequisite for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace. It is high time for aggressor to comply with this call. Ceasefire is a fundamental precondition for the peaceful settlement of this conflict. Mr. President, I would like to start my statement with a poem of a 10-year-old girl, Katerina, from the Donetsk region, dedicated to peace. All Ukrainian children yearn for peace to come, to live with joy upon native ground, to greet the sun, the sky, the flowers blooming bright. May war's dark shadow fade from sight. May silence settle on our Ukraine's hills. May our land shed the horrors war instills. Let long-awaited peace flow to our shore and stand as our protector forevermore. And this girl is only 10 years old. And this is the brutal reality where our children are living in. This is how children in Ukraine see peace on their native land, which will serve as a protector for any repetition of the horrors of war. Mr. President, the United Nations, including its Security Council, was established 80 years ago to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. And here we are again, 8 decades later. Russia, as a permanent member of the Security Council, has waged aggression, has waged genocide, has waged terrorism, has waged war crimes and crimes against humanity on an industrial scale every single day in Ukraine. And this is the country that has misused the Soviet permanent seat in the Council and grossly violated the Charter for decades. Today, this is not only war against Ukraine, and it is not only war against Europe. It is a war against the entire democratic world, against international-based order and against international security order, and against the principles of UN. While occupying the Council's permanent seat and claiming to be one of the guarantees of international peace and security, Russia, in fact, has become the principal destroyer. Mr. President, over 10 million people across Ukraine continue to depend on humanitarian assistance for their basic survival, access to food, water, shelter, healthcare, and electricity because of the ongoing Russian aggression. In 2025 alone, the number of deliberate aerial attacks against Ukraine's civilian targets rose dramatically. During just one recent month, Russia launched over 6,000 strike drones, approximately 5,500 guided aerial bombs, and 158 missiles of various types against Ukrainian people. It is terror directed not at armies, but at maternity wards, hospitals, apartment buildings, power plants and buses carrying workers. It is terror meant to extinguish light, heat and hope. Men do not fight like this. Human beings do not act to one another like this. Russia's strategy is clear. It hasn't achieved a single strategic goal on the battlefield, and therefore it wants to freeze Ukrainians and force us to capitulate. As I said today in the morning in the UNGA hall, Ukraine will not surrender, and Ukraine will not accept peace at any price. The impact of the war on the civilian population is truly devastated. Power outages have affected over 10 million people, forcing hospitals, schools, and emergency services to operate with limited or no power. Disruptions to heating during sub-zero winter temperatures have left Ukrainians unable to maintain basic living conditions. Water shortage have deprived hundreds of thousands of people of access of safe drinking water. Economic disruption has led to the closure of businesses and essential services, deepening humanitarian crisis across the country. These acts are not incidental to hostilities. They bear the hallmarks of serious, gross violations of international humanitarian law and amount to war crimes. We count to document indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks, the use of weapons in densely populated areas, summer executions, torture and ill-treatment of detainees, conflict-related sexual violence, and unlawful deportation and forcible transfer of civilians, including children. In this context, arrest warrants on Russian top officials and militaries issued by the International Criminal Court underscore that such conduct may entail individual criminal responsibility under international law. Those responsible must be held accountable. Moreover, Russia has deliberately targeted grid lines and substations essential for the reliable offset power supply of nuclear power plants, creating nuclear risks not only to Ukraine and not only to Europe. One such attack recently caused the Chernobyl nuclear power plant to lose its external power supply. Against this backdrop, the situation at the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remains gravely alarming. Europe's largest nuclear facility has endured repeated losses of offset power. This leaves the plant in a state of constant and dangerous vulnerability, while Russia continues unlawful and irresponsible attempts to connect the plant to its own energy system. The international community must act decisively and without delay, including through the establishment of temporary international supervision to ensure nuclear and radiation safety, prevent further militarization, and safeguard the plant's legal status. Such measures must clearly serve one objective: the safe, lawful, and irreversible return of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to Ukraine's legitimate authority, which remains the only sustainable guarantee of nuclear security in Europe. The occupation and militarization of nuclear facilities cannot be accepted. Ukraine calls on all partners to impose comprehensive sanctions on Rosatom and to reduce cooperation with this entity wherever possible. Distinguished colleagues, resilience alone is not enough. Ukraine urgently needs both humanitarian and defense assistance to protect our people. We express our deepest gratitude to the governments and citizens of all countries providing assistance. Your support saves lives and sends a clear message to Russia that their terror will not break Ukraine. We're also deeply grateful to the United Nations agencies operating in Ukraine under very difficult conditions. Since February 2022, the UN system in Ukraine has been implementing one of its largest humanitarian operations. In January 2026, the United Nations presented a new humanitarian response plan for Ukraine for the year 2026, aimed at assisting more than 4.1 million Ukrainians. And this is precisely how the United Nations proves its relevance, even when this Council is immobilized due to the presence of the aggressor in this chamber. Mr. President, as of today, 2,000 Ukrainian children have been successfully saved from Russian control and brought back home. At the same time, we are aware of more than 20,000 Ukrainian children who have been abducted and deported by Russia in grave breach of international law. Overall, approximately 1.6 million Ukrainian children remain on the temporary occupied territory. Russia systematically subjects Ukrainian children to militarization, forcibly alters their identity, changes their citizenship status, and seeks to impose upon them a hateful ideology aimed at totally erasing their Ukrainian identity. This is a deliberate component of Russia's genocidal policy against Ukraine and Ukrainians. I urge all UN member states to contribute to implementing the recently adopted UNGA resolution on the return of Ukrainian children, in particular by consolidating pressure on Russia. For Ukraine, the return of each and every child is moral imperative. It is a matter of justice, of identity, and of the very future of our nation. This war has brought immense suffering not only to those killed or injured, but also to the loved ones left behind. mothers searching for their sons, children waiting for their fathers, families living in unbearable uncertainty. Beyond this visible destruction lies another layer of agony, tens of thousands of missing persons, arbitrarily detained civilians and prisoners of war. A central obstacle to clarifying their fate is Russia's systematic practice of incommunicado detention. UN and RCRC are denied unimpeded access to places of detention. In stark contrast, Ukraine provides full access to facilities holding Russian prisoners of war and civilians in full compliance with the international humanitarian law. More than 16,000 Ukrainian civilians are currently held in Russian captivity. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry has conducted that enforced disappearances form part of coordinated Russian state policy and amount to crimes against humanity. Russia's treatment of Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians equally violates every tenet of international criminal and humanitarian law. Russia systematically denies prisoner of war status, subjects them to sham trial based on coerced confessions, and prosecutes them merely for defending their own country. International monitoring missions and investigation teams document arbitrary executions, widespread torture, and inhuman detention conditions, including severe beatings, electric shocks, and denial of medical care. A particularly horrifying dimension concerns conflict-related sexual violence against Ukrainian prisoners of war. The crime prompted the Secretary General to issue a specific notice regarding Russia's treatment of Ukrainian prisoners of war in his 2025 CRVC report. Only the awareness of the inevitability of punishment can compel Russia, other violators, and potential aggressors to comply with international humanitarian law. Ukraine remains ready to proceed with the exchange of prisoners of war on the principle of all for all. We also called for increased international pressure on the Russian Federation to compel it to release all illegally detained civilians and abducted children. Mr. President, Ukraine continues to defend itself against Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, and illegal full-scale military invasion in full accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. Russia can end this war at any time. However, the only way to bring this about is to make Russia bear the full burden of its aggression. The cost of aggression should rise. This should also include actions with regard to new alliances forming around Russia, Iran, the DPRK, and Belarus, united by the contempt for the rule-based international order. The Russian regime and its accomplices will not stop by its own. Russia feels impunity, and it hasn't yet faced proper consequences for its atrocities. Mr. President, despite ongoing peace efforts led by the United States and supported by European partners, Russian Federation continues to show no readiness in stopping this aggression, using the negotiation process as a cover to continue this war of aggression, betting on time. As of today, we have held a number of trilateral meetings with the US and Russian sides. The last took place in Geneva on 17th, 18th February. As of today, we have no agreement on the most sensitive political matters. Ukraine has repeatedly demonstrated full constructive engagement into the peace process. Ukraine is not an obstacle to peace. We want peace more than anyone else. But of course, it should be just peace. Ukraine is ready to make compromises and already said that we are ready to agree to the cessation of hostilities along the current line of context. It is a very difficult compromise for us, but we cannot compromise our sovereignty and territorial integrity. Yet the Kremlin's position remains unchanged. It wants Ukraine to withdraw from our own sovereign territory to ensure that Russia can occupy it. And this is not a matter of negotiating red lines. Sovereignty and territorial integrity is a key founding principle of the UN Charter. It is a red line for Ukraine, and I'm more than sure for every country present in this hall. Mr. President, while Russia continues its war, we must mobilize all possible resources to stop the aggressor and uphold international law. First, sanctions. Sanctions are not a magic solution, but they're essential and they're efficient. They must be strengthened to impose real economic sanctions, including targeting Russia's shadow fleet, limiting oil revenues, and restricting access to critical components of weapons production. Second, defense support. Ukraine needs additional air defense systems and modern capabilities to close out the skies and to protect our people. Third, security guarantees. Ukraine must receive credible and legally binding guarantees to prevent any future aggression. And fourth, justice. Accountability should prevail, and it must include ensuring full compensation by the aggressor for the damage, loss, and injury caused to Ukraine and its people in accordance with international law. And all those responsible, Russian military and political leadership, should be held to account. Mr. President, the question today is whether the United Nations is capable of fulfilling its core function, maintaining international peace and security. We must reaffirm that international law is not just declaratory, but a real instrument of peace. If a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace is not restored in Ukraine, if the rule of force prevails, no country will be safe. If aggression prevails, the global security system will collapse, and I'm afraid UN might collapse. Ukrainians are fighting for the right to live freely on our own land, on our own soil, in our own state, and in accordance with our own choice. We will never recognize the occupation and will never accept territorial concessions. We will never compromise our freedom. Our ultimate goal is comprehensive, just, and lasting peace based on UN Charter, international law, where every state can be certain that sovereignty is respected, its people are safe, and aggression and aggressor are punished. Thank you for your attention. Slava Ukraini.